Good afternoon, everyone. It's been a long day, or rather good morning from where I'm sitting. It's still dark in Mountain View, so still 40 minutes till the sun rises. I hope you all had a great day so far. It's exciting what the Data Innovation Lab and the Foreign Office have got together as a whole conference on a very pertinent topic, and of course the role of Tech Envoys is part and parcel of that, and it's very central. Just in starting off, I'd like to mention that I'm not a Tech Envoy. I'm Consul General, but of course, being in my fourth year here in San Francisco, there have been some connections and some insights as well. But I'm very, very pleased to tell you that we have real Tech Envoys today as our panelists, and I'd like to present them to you before we kick off the invitation. And of course, I kick off presenting His Excellency Ambassador Philip Thigo, who's the Special Envoy on Technology for the Republic of Kenya. He has been Executive Director for Africa for the Thunderbird School for Global Management and an advisor on open government for the government of Kenya. He was recognized by Apolitical as one of the world's 100 most influential people in digital government in 2018, and by Africacom as Africa's top number 100 most influential African leader in technology and telecommunication in 2023. He was recently appointed by the United Nations Secretary General into his high-level advisory board on artificial intelligence, and he was awarded a presidential commendation last year for his distinguished service to the country. So welcome, Philip, Ambassador Thigo, this morning. Thank you for being with us. Secondly, a warm welcome to my friend Eugenio Garcia, who up until recently was one of us of the tech bunch over in San Francisco. Now he's returned to his home country, to Brazil, where he's currently director for the Department of Science, Technology, Innovation, and Intellectual Property at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. And of course, while he was serving here, he was the former Deputy Consul General. He was the head of Science, Technology, Innovation, and focal point for Silicon Valley. He's 30 years in his diplomatic career in foreign policy and diplomacy. He has a PhD in international relations. He was an academic researcher on AI and global governance, and he was the former senior advisor to the President of the United Nations General Assembly in New York from 2018 to 2020. So welcome to you as well, Eugenio. And last and certainly not least, Isabella, my friend here. She's an early bird like me, driven on caffeine this morning, I hope. She is the Austrian Tech Envoy and the Austrian Consul in San Francisco, as well as the co-director of Open Austria. She's an Austrian diplomat with more than 15 years in foreign service. She has previously worked at the Austrian embassies in Brasilia, in Madrid and Belgrade, and since August 22, she's one of us focusing on tech developments in the San Francisco Bay Area and beyond. And in addition, she is also a member of the founded Tech Diplomacy Network. So welcome to you all, and I can't wait to hear from you directly your experiences and your perspectives on what a Tech Envoy is. Let me just, before we start off, give you a brief, and our audience maybe a brief definition that I found on what is a Tech Envoy, and we can take it off from there. I think that's Webster's Encyclopedia, and it says a Tech Envoy is a diplomatic representative tasked with fostering international collaboration and dialogue around technology-related issues. Their role typically involves engaging with governments, international organizations, tech companies, and civil society to address key challenges in the digital age, such as cybersecurity, data privacy, AI governance, digital inclusion, and internet governance. And that's only, I think, a small summing up of all the roles that you take. So let me kick it off and ask you, Ambassador Thigo, a question about the role of a Tech Envoy over time. You've been around sometime, quite a long time, and you've had ample opportunities to watch how that changed, how that burst onto the scene first, and now it's evolving into something probably completely different. So what are the new challenges or what are the new opportunities, let's stay positive, that have emerged over the rise of AI, and certainly we all have witnessed in 2022 when generative AI burst onto the scene. So another a big revolution changing our daily lives.
Thank you so much again, and for of course the team at the Data Innovation Lab for organizing this conversation. The Tech Envoy, as you know, started with a couple of friends in Denmark. At that time was Casper, and I so happened to have been a friend of his when he was trying to shape this role and to think how this was going to evolve. At that time, of course, technology was at a different stage. AI was still very early stage as a self-driving car kind of capability, and so it was important to have a presence in Silicon Valley even at that time, so that to begin to sort of create a relationship between companies and countries, but also because we understood at that time that many companies, for example, their entire sort of capitation was 4 or 5 times larger than countries. And so companies at that time had to be considered like sort of states, because you're dealing with sort of entities that have a lot of influence, but also have are impacting lives. And so, as we know, technology from 2017 up to now, you mentioned ChatGPT, which is just 22 months old. It also means that technology is changing very quickly. And so the role of the Tech Envoy over time has evolved just from not only looking at engaging companies, but also because these topics have become areas of engagement at the international stage, whether it's blockchain, AI, data governance. And so then you require a different form of diplomat to be able to engage in these issues, because then you require countries to have fluency. And then it's not only on one stage, it cuts across many areas. So just in recent past, of course, if we look at what we engaged in this year alone, in terms of the big ones, right? So the UN AI, the UN Resolution Artificial Intelligence for safe, secure, and inclusive AI. Tech Envoys, I mean myself, of course, the US Tech Envoys office, Seth and Leila, who was the lead negotiator for this, we were very much involved. So you see, we brought a very different capability to sort of negotiating a UN resolution. Then come the Global Digital Compact that was agreed last month. You saw again Tech Envoys creating a bigger role. My role, for example, was backstopping Kenya's negotiating role on behalf of G77 and China in terms of just bringing these topics to bear, but then creating sort of a focused engagement in that, and then triangulating with the different missions. So whether it was Geneva, because you're just not negotiating technology, you're negotiating technology's impact on development, right? So whether it's issue around standards, whether it's issue around the technology themselves, whether it's the issue around the governance, whether it's the pillars around data, compute, talent, and how you are trying to create sort of a conversation around. So I think that for me has been sort of what I see increasingly as a role of the Tech Envoys, front-facing diplomatic, but also how do you land these things in country? So then the Tech Envoy becomes that conduit. And I know Denmark, for example, now, Anne-Marie has basically moved back to Denmark. So basically, I think that's how I see it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ambassador Thigo. Eugenio, what's your take on that? Brazil is a central player in all things AI and has, I think, also recently launched AI regulation. So how do you see the role of Tech Envoys evolving? Ambassador Thigo has mentioned many new fields that are opening up and are coming to on top of our agendas.
Yes, thank you so much, Oliver. Nice to meet you here online, and you can hear me well, right? Yes, I agree with Ambassador Thigo, and of course, the idea of tech diplomacy began in San Francisco when Denmark appointed the first ever Tech Ambassador to Silicon Valley back in 2017. So I think this field has been evolving very quickly, not only because of technology, it's speedy in terms of speedy change, in terms of adoption and new inventions or new applications of technology, including AI, of course. But as you know, the UN Charter was signed in San Francisco in 1945. So San Francisco became the birthplace of the United Nations. And now San Francisco has become the birthplace of tech diplomacy. But the point is, tech diplomacy is going global. So I think maybe countries should consider that not only, of course, Silicon Valley is still the largest, most powerful global tech hub, and possibly the world's most important innovation cluster. But countries should assess in terms of a global range for their activities in terms of tech diplomacy. So I think that's something to discuss. But that's one point. Second point would be that tech diplomacy should not be seen just as reaching out to the big tech companies, but engaging with the whole innovation ecosystem in several countries, including startups, incubators, accelerators, venture capital investors, research centers, universities, because this is perhaps the Brazilian view of tech diplomacy. We have been working for several years in terms of the idea of innovation diplomacy, which is development-centered. So I think that's something that developing countries should consider. That all these efforts should contribute for development, economic, social, and technological development. So that's the idea, that we should try, the Tech Envoys operate beyond traditional trade promotion and activities to attract investments, but also focus on science technology in general, not only the internet industry, but all the emerging technologies. And of course, we see how we can connect and make these connections so that all these efforts will contribute for development in our countries.
Thank you, Eugenio. Isabella, Austria has been among the first countries that established the role of a tech envoy here, right at the world's hub of AI in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. How do you see your role evolving, new trends, and especially opportunities from the point of view of Austria?
Thank you, Oliver. Good morning. Definitely good morning from my side here as well. First of all, let me thank the German Foreign Office and the Data Innovation Lab for the invitation to this event. It's a privilege to be part of this first forum. And hello as well, Eugenio. Good to see you again. I would like to echo what my esteemed previous speakers have said, and I definitely agree about the role of tech ambassadors or tech envoys, how it came to being. As you have rightly said, Oliver, Austria has been among the first. We were actually the second here after Denmark to establish a tech ambassador or tech envoy in San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And in my 2 years here, it has only been 2 years actually, but there have already been several, I would say, almost dramatic changes. As you yourself have mentioned earlier, end of 2022, ChatGPT was released, and afterward people here say was in 2007 the iPhone moment. I think that very soon we will be talking about, when we talk about the past, the ChatGPT moment as well. And maybe from an Austrian, or rather I would say a European perspective, a development or a change in the field of tech diplomacy that has definitely come about in the last years has been regulations. You know, when the first tech ambassador was appointed, as Ambassador Thigo mentioned, it was Denmark who appointed Kasper Klynge here. There was very, very few of that, you know, very few legal bases on how tech was actually operating. And then slowly but surely, as I think a result of the increasing engagements between states and tech companies, there was awareness on both sides that some kind of rules, some kind of guidelines were definitely necessary, because obviously tech and its implementations, they know no I would say they know no boundaries, but they basically certainly don't know frontiers. So it's not necessarily only happening in one country, and especially the big players around here are definitely global players. So some countries or sets of countries, such as the European Union, have taken for the first steps towards regulations, which of course are a priori only valid in our jurisdiction. But maybe if you look at the first one, the GDPR, there has clearly been seen an effect that went beyond our borders, and that other countries have looked at this model and have also tried, or some successfully implemented that, such as we can actually see here in the state of California, if not on the federal level of the USA. And other countries such as Australia, Canada, etc., have been going there too. So that has definitely shaped our field of action, because the initial engagements were really, as Eugenio said, with the companies to establish some kind of first contact and to start to understand and to communicate what we were doing, what they were doing, in order to try to understand. Then when the first regulations came about, I think that has changed very much towards talking with their lawyers, especially in those hubs where decisions are being taken, such as Brussels, but also New York, of course. And maybe just to end this first statement, we here in Silicon Valley see our role also increasingly as people who engage with the tech sector, not only about rules and regulations, but especially about developments, meaning really I'm talking IT development and the next steps and what those will be bringing about, in order to maybe anticipate or prepare at least the field for possible future legal bases. And if we, I believe, understand better what is going on here on the ground and what plans the tech sector has, it should be easier and it should be smoother, and that should be beneficial for both sides to go along with the rules and regulations as well.
Thank you, Isabella. Thank you all three of you for framing some aspects of the role. And I would like to turn to the role of big tech now, and maybe also in an international context, the role of large nations that sometimes seem to dominate the conversation. And I would like to ask you, Ambassador Thigo, how can smaller states and developing countries make sure that they are left behind in this AI-driven, I would almost compare it to the arms race of the 50s, so this drive for data and more data and energy, of course, and maybe also the talk about de-risking and decoupling. So the question, who has access to what? How do you see that shaping also, or being a part of foreign policy? And how do countries that are not so in such a dominating role, how can they make sure they're in it?
Sorry, I was on mute. No, thank you so much. For the last 1 year, that has been my obsession. As you know, as part of the UN Secretary General's Advisory Body on Artificial Intelligence, the idea was that because there's so much fragmentation around AI governance, if you look, and we did a mapping, so anybody who can grab a copy of our report, it's online. If you look at the UN Tech Envoys office, you'll see that report there, AI for Humanity. We've actually mapped the previous fragmentation before this came into the United Nations. So that's why we were one of the biggest advocates to ensure that at least some form of governance mechanism is developed at the United Nations. So of course, you have the GDPR, beyond GDPR, you have the EU AI Act, you have the GPI, you have the Hiroshima Principles, you have the G20 process. So there's a lot of fragment, the OECD one. And if you notice a lot of those, only 7 countries were really in all of them. And you had almost 120 out of it. So the only process that had other countries, small states like us, was UNESCO. And UNESCO was basically focusing on AI ethics. So I think it was important to ensure that the Secretary General and the United Nations sort of have a handle on this. And so if you look at our report and the Global Digital Compact, for me, that was step one. How do you ensure that countries who do not have any other forums for global governance of AI have the United Nations as a place to do that? So we know the GDC was adopted by consensus, and you know it's countries like Africa that carried the GDC forward, because then we were focusing on a couple of things. One is that because of the principles, right? So because the idea of artificial intelligence must be how to build a safe, secure, inclusive, which was a word I want to underline, and trustworthy digital future for everybody. Because AI, as you know, is a general purpose technology. It's about digital and how the digital future will be shaped. So I think countries like ours must advocate for that principle. Safe, secure, inclusive, and trustworthy, because then it must build public trust. The second part, of course, is the infrastructure of artificial intelligence, as you've said, concentrated amongst a few countries and a few companies. And this is the data part, right? So how do you ensure that countries, for example, the global majority, their data is documented and part of the AI ecosystem? The talent piece, how do you ensure that we can build requisite talent and building talent pipeline? So how do we invest in that? The compute, which, as you know, is more contentious right now, whether, as you've said, whether it's GPUs access or whether it's power, energy that powers this. But still, how do we ensure that countries like ours, outside the arms race or preventing a race to the bottom, can access GPUs to drive compute for our ecosystem? So I think this is what largely small states, member countries, have been doing it. And so if you look at the bigger, so then now I move into what in the report we kept on talking about, the commons. So how do you advocate for the commons? So we need a common understanding, right? A common understanding in terms of AI, the trends, the prospects, the opportunities. So it's just not about doom and gloom. We need a common ground, policy dialogue. As I've said, there's a lot of fragmentation. So how do we agree on the common principles and the standards? How do you agree on the benefits? So the capacity building piece, it's moving very quickly, but then how do you build this capacity building network that is a collaboration between the AI hubs and the AI have-nots? And then how do we ensure that for us, it's not AI for vanity, it's AI for development? So how do we ensure that we do not lose the race towards, of course, prospects around economic opportunity, but very much around delivering for the challenges we have, whether it's food systems, climate action, and the challenges that we have today. Yeah.
Thank you, Ambassador Thigo. A fascinating look into how many facets there are that needed to be looked at. And I wanted to maybe take it up a notch on a global level and maybe ask you, Eugenio, with a view to the role that big tech are playing and maybe the political gap that is still there in terms of who decides what, just quoting the war in Ukraine or other conflicts. How do you see, and how does Brazil see AI shaping the balance of power in international relations? No, it's a big question.
Thank you, Oliver. Yeah, I fully agree with Ambassador Thigo. I think from the point of view of most developing countries, we need AI for development. And also inclusion, any approach to AI governance at the global level should be inclusive and ensure representation from developing countries from the global south. And of course, we can discuss the struggle for technological supremacy globally, but I think for the world's majority of the population, it's sometimes the risk of exclusion is real. And the problem is that we can create or a new divide would be established between AI-ready nations and not AI-ready nations. And sometimes we talk about existential risks from AI, which is perhaps it's a very important discussion, of course, but the exclusion risks are real. And so I think that's something that we need to address as a matter of priority. So I think the Tech Ambassadors, especially from the developing countries, I think they can play an active role in a number of areas to address this challenge, like pushing for international cooperation or engaging in all these global policy making debates. and of course supporting efforts to ensure responsible use of new technologies and coordinating among them, changing views or promoting a common vision for the future or joining forces with other partners in cross-regional institutions or in global organizations like the United Nations. So I think Tech Ambassadors should engage in multi-stakeholder dialogues with civil society, private companies, researchers, and encourage this genuine cross-cultural dialogue. Sometimes we see the problem is to see this digital global order as like a bifurcation or like opposing blocks, and I think that's the opposite. What we should try to do is encourage this cross-cultural dialogue and also invest in capacity building to empower people and foster tech literacy. So I think the challenges are so many, but if we can learn from these multi-stakeholder dialogues and these multidisciplinary perspectives, we can bring new voices to the table, and when we can hear their concerns, or also explore alternative approaches to address this challenge.
Yeah, thank you, Eugenio. Isabella, Eugenio mentioned the various stakeholders and groups that are also involved, apart from political negotiations that have to take place in order to close the gap and to move forward and to be more inclusive in what is going on a global or international level. What is how do you maybe a more practical question? How do you collaborate with business sectors and academia, and also how do you bring citizens into play when it comes to technology? Because of course we all have to bring them on board, and they have vital roles to play apart from the negotiations rooms in New York and other capitals.
Yeah, that is a very valid question, and it is something that we're trying to do here on, I would say, almost a daily basis. So it's a constant outreach, I would say, to these different actors. Academia is a classic, especially here in Silicon Valley, where we have so many high-level academic institutions, civil society as well. So we're trying to be active here as Open Austria with events, with networking events around, for example, some of the important conferences that are happening here and that bring the tech community together, not only the one that is already present here, but also people from all other parts of the world, be that about cybersecurity or be that about gaming. Luckily, there's a lot happening here that attracts relevant stakeholders to the area. So that gives us this privileged position of being able to engage with them and to talk with them. Citizens, well, that is, I would say, a multinational effort as well. Of course, when you are abroad as a tech envoy, as is my case, it is more difficult to know what your citizens back home would think. But luckily, we all have our headquarters, we have our mothership that keeps us informed in that sense. And then great colleagues in other places around the world, such as in New York or Paris, when we talk about UNESCO or OECD, Geneva, Brussels, and the other important hubs. So it really is, I would say, a constant exercise of listening, of reading, and of exchanging with those people that are knowledgeable, and of course, at first identify those who are the most valid sources of information. But then, that I would say is the job of any good diplomats anyway.
Thank you, Isabella. You're so right. Ambassador Thigo, just maybe bring that question to you, because other than Eugenio and Isabella, you are doing your job mostly from inside, from within a nation country. So how does that work in Kenya's case? outreach to civil society, to academia, and to businesses, to bring them on board and to convince them and to bring about the needed or the hoped for effect of AI.
Thank you so much. Potentially, I mean, I have had the advantage. Maybe I've had an unfair advantage over Isabella and Eugenio, because I've been watching their role evolving, and so I think over time we've actually realized that because technology is just not only, as Eugenio mentioned, in Silicon Valley. It's very much around how you engage, yes, the tech companies, but then how it impacts your country. And so that actually informed a lot of our decisions on how my role is led from the country. And so, because it's easy then to connect with the mothership, because I am part of the mothership, as Isabella mentioned, we were very interesting and a very brilliant minister cabinet secretary for foreign affairs and a principal secretary, where we have been able to create a community of practice amongst those frontier embassies, because then I can coordinate them from here. So I can look at Geneva, I can look at New York. DC is important, as you know, for sort of policy for tech companies. Increasingly, the very nuanced one like Paris, London are opening up. So that has been the one part. Easy to coordinate across the many other missions around the specific tech topics. But remember, tech topics move. So, for example, if it's Geneva, very much around connectivity and IT, but I can watch it from here, and then beyond connecting with the mothership, I can connect with the relevant ministry that is actually the content holder for that. So that makes it easy for me. Then in terms of the deep dive, again, historical advantage for Kenya is that a lot of the big tech actually have their regional headquarters in Kenya. So basically for me, it's easy to talk to Google, Meta, Microsoft in terms of conversations, but then also to do what I'm increasingly calling listening tours. So I do that a lot. I do a lot of convenings and multi-stakeholder, but sometimes deep dives. We do a lot of thought leadership in terms of getting public sector and private sector in a very neutral, nuanced conversation. For example, whether it's around blockchain, whether it's about data centers, whether it's about climate smart supply chain. So easy for me to sort of do that here. With civil society, of course, it's very much around inclusivity. And so with civil society, it's been very interesting for us to create a lab, right? So in terms of practical application, so how do you get designers? So I have a very good design team. How do I get public sector, civil society, policymakers into a co-creation environment to test out a lot of these things, including testing on policies? So that has been the Kenyan approach.
Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. Eugenio, you've been yourself tech envoy to Silicon Valley, to San Francisco. What are, to your memories, what are the most rewarding or impactful aspects that you have got to know while here, and maybe you have an example or a project that you would like to highlight to us that sticks out in your personal record?
Thank you, Oliver. I think one of the tasks of the Tech Envoys right now is to raise awareness. I think one of the most impactful contributions I could make in San Francisco was also within the Brazilian Foreign Service, because this is like we're trying to sometimes persuade or convince people that tech diplomacy is important. And for example, AI is something for many people, it's so new, and they really don't have a technical expertise on in artificial intelligence. So there is a need for an education in terms of technology. So I think raising awareness is something that we tech diplomats, we need to do this, not only in our foreign services, but also in terms of public opinion and engaging with many actors domestically, but also at the international level. So I think this was a contribution I was able to make. And if I could perhaps highlight just one project, was when last year we noticed that we have many Brazilians working with AI in Silicon Valley, but they were not connected to each other. So we decided to create a group, like a community called Brazilians AI. And we have on a website, and the first meeting was like 10 people. Then we decided to reach out to other Brazilians in the Bay Area, and we managed to gather 50, 60 people. Now this same group, Brazilians AI, has more than 400 people. So I think there's really a real sense of belonging in terms of Brazilians work with AI in Silicon Valley, and not only living there, but also people in Brazil, because that's the idea, not to create a group only for residents in the Bay Area, but also openly for people in our country to engage with this innovation ecosystem in the Bay Area, so that we can exchange views, knowledge, and mentorship, or do business with startups, and so everything is connected. So that's right. We decided that this group should not be a closed community, but also open to more Brazilians to join. I think this was one example of a very successful initiative.
Thank you, Eugenio, for that. And I remember that when Tech Diplomacy Network was founded, Isabella, you're a member together with Eugenio, who now left. That's also, of course, something very valuable that Tech Envoys created to get a greater, to come up with a greater platform to discuss all those sometimes puzzling and very diverse trends in all AI. I wanted, before I open the floor to questions, I wanted to throw one final question at all three of you. And that's, of course, maybe reconnecting to the first question. That's the role of Tech Envoys and how you see it might change in the coming years, and what kind of skills maybe you would recommend that, or you would say and see that a Tech Envoy will need in order to succeed also in the future. And maybe you start, Isabella.
I believe it will definitely be an evolving field. It is constantly changing, and to be concrete, what it has been since the beginning, and what will definitely need to be more, is this common understanding and finding a common language between us diplomats, country representatives on the one side, and then the tech folks, so to say, as they say here, on the other side. When I attended the RSA Cybersecurity Conference this year in San Francisco, the U.S. Ambassador for Cyber and Digital Affairs was there as well, Ambassador Nathaniel Fig, and he said that within the U.S. Foreign Service, for the future, there should be at least one tech envoy, so to speak, or one tech diplomat at every representation abroad. That was their goal, which sounds ambitious, but I actually do believe that it's quite realistic, because all of us classic diplomats will have to move towards this field more and more. So it will definitely be a learning process, but I believe it to be necessary as an addition that is here to stay in the already relatively broad portfolio of skills that the diplomat should possess.
Thank you, Isabella. Eugenio, what's your hunch? What's your take?
I think in terms of tech envoys, not all countries have tech ambassadors. So I think, first of all, countries and governments should decide and make an assessment in their specific case, their needs, their priorities. Should I have a tech ambassador? Should I appoint a tech envoy? Should I give him or her a global mandate to engage both with domestic actors, but also international debates? But I agree with Isabella. I think countries should first secure a core team of tech diplomats and experts at the headquarters. They should be, of course, knowledgeable of emerging technologies and policy debates. But at the same time, these countries should be sending tech diplomats overseas, embassies, consulates, international organizations around the world, but in since this is very ambitious, but we perhaps focusing on strategic places where tech diplomacy is more demanding, for example. So I think this is something that the government should assess in each particular case, but also consider design a digital foreign policy strategy, because sometimes it's necessary to put all players on the same page domestically, by the way, and give direction to a whole of government approach in terms of technology.
Thank you, Eugenio. Ambassador Thigo, you who are hovering on top of international negotiations on a national level, but also, as you said, going into these on these listening trips, etc. What's your take on it? How will it evolve? How will it change? And what do Tech Envoys need more in the future?
No, I mean, for sure. I mean, I agree with Eugenio and Isabella on the fact that you need a focal point. I think you need a Tech Envoy. And my sense is that you need a Tech Envoy's office. In terms of, because I'm sure Isabella, Eugenio will agree with me, talk to Anne-Marie or Nele from Estonia, the portfolio is increasing. So you really need an office that then can carry the mandate, because the second thing you need is sort of resilience of the office. It shouldn't be just that one administration kind of sees the role of a tech envoy, and that's useful, and maybe on the next democratic transition, that changes. I think it's going to be very important to create that resilience, because technology is here to stay. The second part, I counted about 40 more topics, 40 new topics around technology. Not one person can handle it, right? Whether from even AI itself, right? AI, for example, in the military domain, I am not competent enough, even as a tech envoy, to engage on that specific piece, because that's on another domain. So there has to be a way that countries begin to invest on the sort of subject matter competencies in foreign missions. And then that could be coordinated, of course, by Tech Envoy, because you need, as sort of Isabella mentioned, a common understanding. And a lot of these issues are interrelated. So my sense is that, yes, Tech Envoy, Office of the Tech Envoy, some kind of coordination role because of the subject matter, but then build competencies across the foreign service. So for me, it's Tech Plus, right? So if somebody in trade, so if you have a trade attaché, how do you ensure that that trade attaché has technology competencies? And then something that then the Tech Envoy can support in terms of then how that company, for example, engages on digital, that country engages in digital trade, for example, digital public infrastructure with another country. That's how I'd basically see it.
Thank you very much. Now, before we I think we have time for one or a little bit more questions. I just wanted to get out of the way. There was a question raised, difference between a Consul General and a Tech Envoy. And of course, the Consul General, that can be quickly answered, is not a Tech Envoy, and he's something, if anything, he's something like a small ambassador in his own district that he's looking after. So he's basically trying to cover all aspects of the bilateral relations that might arise, from cultural affairs to political to economic to press and public relations. So basically subdividing a country into different districts, and that was the Consul General, and also Tech, of course, but not exclusively. Whereas the Tech Envoy, I think, has more, and I envy Tech Envoys for that. I would like to do more of that. So that's from my point of view, that's one of the main differences. And then there was a question asked about Germany. Germany has not yet a Tech Envoy in San Francisco. I recommended that several times to our headquarters in Berlin. What we do have is a cybersecurity ambassador, Maria Adebar, newly appointed, and of course she's also coming to the Bay Area, especially when we have these yearly conferences of cybersecurity ambassadors. So getting that out of the way, I turn to one question by Federica Bicchi from the London School of Economics. How do you, Tech Envoys, relate to your ministries of foreign affairs and capitals? What are the main sources of resistance and how to go around them? Diplomacy is seemingly quite steeped in its own tradition, true to some point. How to bring cutting-edge innovation? Who would like to tackle that? Maybe you, Eugenio?
Thank you. As I said, I think raising awareness is part of our job as tech diplomats or tech envoys. And of course, foreign services may be resistant to change because of a very old and traditional institutions in many cases. But that's the challenge that we need to tackle, because otherwise it's where the fourth industrial revolution is there, and we need to face reality. And so raising awareness is a key task that all tech envoys should try to stress these points. But you also need to promote dialogue and bridge the gap between technologists, I mean, developers, engineers, and people from the technical community, and bridge the gap between these technologies and policymakers. I mean, leaders, politicians, diplomats, governmental officials, even parliamentarians, and because these two must talk to each other and understand each other. That's why some tech envoys, they should be bilingual, but not in terms of more language, but speaking both the language of diplomacy and the language of technology, so that he or she would be able to make the case for tech diplomacy and explore opportunities for interconnection between these two worlds, the technical and also the diplomatic world.
Right. Thank you, Eugenio. There's a question from Ushwal Kumar, and maybe that goes to you, Ambassador Thigo, and it goes, as we see the rise of generative AI and increased competition among big tech firms, how can smaller or developing nations build the necessary infrastructure and talent? I think we touched upon that a little bit, to not only participate in the AI areas, but also lead in areas where they have a competitive advantage, possibly, such as AI for social good or AI for environmental sustainability.
No, you're right. So I think we touched on the topic, but just to sort of reinforce, one, of course, is to participate in the global governance of artificial intelligence, which is for us basically at the United Nations. Good to be involved in the others, but how do you ensure that you make a case at the UN? Because AI for humanity must really be governed within existing human rights principles and frameworks. I think that's key to that conversation. Second conversation, of course, is how do you have a conversation around investments? Again, on the same things, right? So investment in data, investment in talent, investment in compute. When it comes to compute, it's a matter of collaboration. Because not one country, especially in our part of the world, has enough power, energy, or the workload for the compute. So how do you create or collaborate on that? And those are the things that, for example, in our case, we are having conversations with, for example, countries around ourselves. And that's one of my roles, so that we can see how to share compute. Inbuilt in that, of course, a conversation around data governance, cross-border data flows, which again is a role of the Tech Envoy, to ensure that there's this sort of conversation across jurisdictions on how to build trust or manage sort of trust around this kind of shared capability.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Maybe a final question I would allow by William Keppel, maybe to you, Isabella. He asked, I imagine that the two faces of Tech Envoys, technical and diplomatic, don't overlap much in the common talent pool. How do you see new talent for this emergent field growing? In your opinion, should Tech Envoy offices train the talent in the intersection of tech and diplomacy?
Yes, the short answer is yes, they should. Actually, my ministry last year set up the first internal training course on tech diplomacy for just us diplomats, and I was gladly also part of that in doing one of the modules on Silicon Valley here. And actually, Professor Biola, who is part of this event today, was also teaching 2 other modules in our course. Other than that, I would also say that what I have noticed in the process of hiring new diplomats, so to speak, is that this field of tech is getting increasing attention, and that those who join us, the young ones, many of them bring some of this knowledge, in addition to, yes, the traditional skills and areas of expertise. that we require from them. So it should be a double track approach. It should be make sure that a critical mass of new people that will join your service come with some of this knowledge. And that is actually not that hard, because you would be surprised in how many areas you find little techies. It could also be in the area of culture, in the area of historians, etc., where you would maybe not expect it at first sight. But then, of course, those who have already joined and who have proven that they know all the classic diplomatic skills should definitely be open to training. And luckily, this is usually also not that difficult, because, as we rotate from one country to the other and one position to the other, we are always faced with learning new things. So tech will be one of these areas as well.
Oh, yeah, thank you so much. Well, and there's more to read on what Kenya's doing that Ambassador Thigo has just posted in the chats for those who want to follow up. I think, and I fear, and I'm saddened we've come to the end of our time. The sun has risen in the meantime in Mountain View. So thank you all very much, Ambassador Thigo, Eugenio, Isabella. That's been a fascinating talk. And although I'm in my 4th year here, I've learned so much. And thank you for sharing all of your insights and perspectives. Thank you.